Do not come at me for using a plastic water bottle. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Hannah. I am a trauma coach and healing coach for Muslim women. I help Muslim women heal from trauma and reinvent themselves. So if that's something that you are looking for, then go to the link in my description, inshallah, to learn how you can work with me or how you can join my trauma group coaching program. One thing that always tripped me up about our community, I talked about it for years, is we will spend the most absurd amount of money on our weddings. And even the people who are like, yeah, I want a simple wedding, I want it to just be like an outdoor, to end up spending an absurd amount of money. Like, we all get sucked into this. And when I was planning my wedding, I was very proud, alhamdulillah, for the budget that I was able to maintain. But it was still pretty pricey. We will spend thousands on outfits. We will pay $80 for decor at the center of a table that people will only see for 6 hours. We'll drop literally, oh my God, like thousands on food, which food is the most important part. So I'm not even going to fault anyone for that. The photographer, $4,000, $6,000, $8,000 is a very typical amount in the United States to have a photographer. All of this money, a bouquet of flowers for $200, $300. I remember when I got quoted, I was like, no, thank you. I literally had my best friend make my bouquet, and she did an amazing job, mashallah. All this money spent. And for what? 30% of marriages in the Muslim community end in divorce. I believe it was 32%, right? So we beat out the 50% in the typical Western society, but a third of us will spend life savings amount on a wedding, or someone else's savings, our parents, her parents, right? Only for a 60-something%, not even, yeah, a 60-something% chance of success. Why are we comfortable with that? So I'm here to give a different perspective on this and to call us out. You guys know I'm all about self-improvement. I'm all about what can we do? What can we do to stack the odds in our favor? And here's something that nobody is going to ever tell you. You can spend every dollar you have on your wedding. You can make it as beautiful as you want it to be. You can have the most stunning portraits of you and your spouse. You can get the most du'as from the people who attend. You can read the books. You can watch the lectures. You can get the best sheikh to sign your nikah contract. You can do all of that. And until you have put in the time and the energy to actually do authentic, internal shifting around marriage, what it means, how I will show up, what will hold me back from showing up as my best, you're in for a rough ride. Most of you guys will not identify someone who can support you in this until it's too late. You'll ride it out for months. You end up realizing, oh shoot, things are not going as well as we'd hope. We're arguing way more, or we're insulting each other. We're, kicking below the belt. And now we want a counselor. Now we want to go to the sheikh for advice. Now we want to ask, the elders in our community or our parents what they would do. Now we actually want to do it. Prevention is better than cure. The amount of time that you are willing to spend preparing for marriage in the most intentional way that you can, not passively listening to something here, reading something here, but saying like, okay, what do I need to do or have in order to succeed in marriage? It is going to directly correlate to the success of your marriage. I promise you that. I remember I wrote something about this in regards to on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, by the way, you can go to the link in my to the description, and it should have my handle there, just my name, my first name dot my last name. And I talked about this. For those who are afraid to get married, here's my advice to you, right? And one of the biggest pieces of advice I gave is to recognize that oftentimes the fear that we experience around marriage is not because we're actually afraid, but it's because the messaging that we have received from those around us make us look at marriage as something to fear, because we see toxic, unhealthy marriages where people, don't talk about each other like they love each other. They talk about each other like they tolerate each other. Right? They talk about each other like, this is just someone I have to deal with, so I'm going to deal with it. And then we try to romanticize that. It's not romantic. It's not cute. It's really sad. But Allah doesn't talk about marriage like that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about marriage as something divine, right? That He places mawadda and rahmah between the husband and the spouse. That He places a certain level of mercy in the hearts of one another where you overlook each other's mistakes. And you come together having no idea that this would ever be your life. You weren't born in, this isn't like in our families, Allah chose our siblings and we have them all our lives essentially. But this person Allah brings into your life later, then you realize, oh, you become family in a different way. And someone had commented, well, this is the qadr of Allah, right? If you end up in a bad marriage, it's a qadr of Allah, right? And if you end up in a good marriage, it's a qadr of Allah. How did we take qadr and we distorted it to this extent where we think that there's no preparation, there's no element of tying our camel, there's no stacking the odds in our favor, right? Could it be that we entered into a marriage and we messed up and we did some really horrible things and we got triggered and we didn't deal with our trauma before marriage, and that disrupted the health and the fabric of trust in my marriage, and because of that, I ended up divorced, or I ended up in a really toxic situation? Was that because of qadr, or was that because we didn't do the work? Or maybe you're in a marriage with someone who didn't do the work. Was that qadr, or did they just neglect the work? So I'd like for us to take a bit more ownership, show up a little bit more in how our actions and our mindsets and the work that we do impact our life. And there's nobody you owe it more to than your spouse. Because no one wants to enter into a marriage or enters into a marriage hoping for it to end. If they did, that's a really horrible circumstance to get married, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for them. But nobody enters into it, and yet a third of you guys will end up in that situation. You always think it's not going to be you until it is. So do the work beforehand. And what does that look like? Looks like a lot of things. As a trauma coach, I'm going to tell you the biggest impact that you can have on your marriage is to do the work on your trauma before you get married, or if you're engaged, while you're engaged, before you are living with that person, so that you can actually ensure that your triggers do not turn into the demons or the monsters of your marriage, because I promise you they will. So much of trauma is interrelational. Right? So much of trauma is associated with your connection with another person. Someone else hurt you. A parent, a sibling. There is a fear of abandonment. There is a sense of loneliness. So much of it is associated with other people. So how do you think that you're going to enter into what is the most intimate relationship of your life, emotionally and physically, and not have those same patterns come up when they are the patterns that existed in even less intimate relationships in your life? It's not possible. It doesn't work like that. So identifying what your trauma is, working through it, healing and integrating, which doesn't mean that you just journal on it, although that's a very powerful means of going about it. By the way, I have a video on my channel already. If you guys have not seen it, it's called Here's How to Truly Be Ready for Marriage, where I kind of walk you through a system of how to do this work. Highly recommend you watch it. It looks like knowing how to build your intuition, how to make sure that your trauma doesn't lead you to someone who's not good for you, especially if you've been around people who are not healthy, who are toxic, who are narcissistic, who have harmed you. It doesn't matter that you don't like those patterns of behavior. Your nervous system is so wired towards leaning towards that toxicity because it's familiar that it is very, very common. In fact, there's literally research and statistics on this, that it is very common for people with that kind of trauma to end up in relationships with people who are just as abusive or even worse. It is extremely common, for example, in the case of someone who grew up around domestic violence, to end up in a domestic violence situation when they're older. in an adult relationship. And I say adult relationship because this was a research done around non-Muslims as well, right? Very common. We can't outsmart our trauma. We have to heal it and integrate it. You have to do the work around it. Building your intuition so you don't make the wrong decision because of this pattern that we talked about means you have to actually know what healthy looks like. And most of us don't know because we don't know how to recognize safety in our nervous systems. We don't know how to catch when something is normal versus when something is abnormal. We talk about green flags, red flags, but we don't actually know what that means. We take our advice of what to look for from like movies and anecdotes, and we don't really look into what it is that we actually should be considering for a spouse. It's a very odd way of going about it. And the last pieces around this are understanding what does a healthy, flourishing, non-toxic relationship look like. And there are lots of ways that we can go about this. It's identifying patterns of what healthy communication looks like, what healthy resolution of conflict looks like. But one of my favorite ways of going about this is actually exploring the Prophet ﷺ's marriage to Khadija and what elements were involved there that we can tap into in ourselves because we have those qualities, or if we don't, we can at least we can build them out to be able to ensure that we're coming in prepped for marriage, stacking those odds in our favor. And if the other person has done that as well, or is willing to do that, it makes a huge difference in the success of your marriage. The couples that I've seen that are truly happy are not the ones that are posting all their vacations, or sharing all their cutesy moments on social media. It's not them. It's the ones that I watch them and I just see how they communicate, and I'm like, subhanAllah, there's so much honor and respect in the way they talk to each other. There's so much sincere admiration for one another, right? You can tell that they put in the work before they got married so that they can enjoy that work with one another when they are married, right? They put in the work separately. They didn't even know each other. They put in that work and they get to show up in that way in their marriage. These are all super important, and each and every single one of these points is addressed systematically and practically, meaning how do you actually do this in a 2-day coaching program that I'm going to be hosting December 14th and 15th for any Muslim brother or sister. This is actually my first program that's open to both men and women who are trying to get married, but understand that their trauma is going to show up in their marriage and they want to do the work around it. I have all of the information that can be found on my website. The link is in the description to learn more about what is included, what the modules include, how I'm going to be coaching, who this is for, who it is not. You can go to that link in the description, and I hope that this was helpful for you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.